All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the ultimate, completely mind-bending thought experiment about the very nature of our reality. We're going to systematically walk through exactly what happens to human consciousness when it confronts the possibility that absolutely everything around it is artificially generated. We are mapping out the entire psychological evolution here, going from sheer terror all the way to ultimate empowerment.
So what if your entire life is a simulation? Seriously, think about that for a second. Imagine if everything you know, everything you've ever touched, built, or loved was suddenly shattered. This isn't just some sci-fi movie trope. It's a real philosophical exercise that forces us to strip away our most fundamental assumptions about existence. I mean, if the world isn't made of atoms, but of data, how does the human mind even begin to process that?
This kicks off stage one, the localized glitch, or the unraveling of reality.
You know, the illusion doesn't break with some massive Hollywood explosion. No, it breaks with these tiny, microscopic, totally mundane errors. Like, say you're holding your morning coffee, right? And a single drop of rain just freezes midair for a fraction of a microsecond. Or maybe a shadow from your desk lamp falls in precisely the wrong direction. Or you catch a rhythmic stutter in a stranger's blink that suddenly exposes this cold mathematical grid underneath. Look, when that sensory code slips and you actually witness this impossible error, your mind goes through a catastrophic cognitive realignment. You literally can never unsee it.
And this forces you to confront a pretty dizzying realization. Those solid brick walls of your house, the biting chill of the winter air, they aren't woven from raw atomic matter at all. Actually, they're just the flawless, real-time output of an unfathomably powerful rendering engine. Every single childhood triumph, every scar from a past heartbreak, it all just instantly becomes a pre-programmed variable, calculated by some unseen digital architecture. Crazy, right?
Which drops us right into stage two, the hollow vacuum, also known as the theater of the absurd.
Now, this is where your perception of other people radically changes. The populace around you, they cease to be autonomous souls. Instead, they become non-player characters, NPCs, blindly executing these hard-coded behavioral loops. Those deep late-night conversations with your family, the intense rivalries with your colleagues, or, even that one coworker who always heats up fish in the office microwave. Suddenly, they're unmasked as scripted subroutines, and they're designed purely to maximize your emotional immersion.
So walking through a packed downtown marketplace entirely ceases to be a human social experience. It becomes, well, a terrifying exercise in systems analysis. You're not really participating in society anymore. You're basically analyzing a complex software package in real time, watching all these algorithms dictate every single smile, tear, and gesture. And yeah, this brings on a profound, paralyzing kind of loneliness. You realize you are completely alone in this vibrant world of living mirrors. You are literally the only entity around who has looked directly at the rendering horizon, the only one awake in a world of sleeping code. Honestly, it's an incredibly heavy psychological burden to carry.
But then we pivot from that dread to stage three, hacking the system logic, or the exploit.
Here's where the terrified spectator inside you gives way to a hyper-focused strategist. Because if physics, economics, and human biology are merely lines of code, well, they are inherently vulnerable to being aggressively manipulated. Think about it. The global financial market is no longer this chaotic beast. It's just a repeating loop with predictable patterns just waiting to be harvested. Human biology, it's just modular hardware to be ruthlessly streamlined for sleep and cognitive focus. And mastering elite skills isn't about decades of grinding anymore. It's simply about triggering the exact behavioral inputs that the engine recognizes as progression milestones. So how exactly do you execute this exploit? Well, first, you systematically strip away self-doubt, cultural programming, and artificial anxieties. You just treat them as inhibitors that are clogging up your processing speed. Next, you reverse engineer the underlying logic of the simulation's internal health metrics. And finally, you scale your real-world output at a staggering vertical trajectory. By doing this, you completely bypass that grueling decades-long grind and build a towering empire at a speed that, to everyone else, looks like pure, unadulterated genius. And this brings us to a massively empowering realization. You are no longer playing by the emotional rules of the Matrix. By completely detaching yourself from the psychological fear of failure that paralyzes the ordinary populace, you get to treat the economy, your career, and even your physical limits like a masterfully designed strategy game. You can predict market shifts with unnatural precision, simply because you've discarded the emotional baggage the system programmed you to feel.
Of course, that compounding scale of success forces us into stage 4, the server and the void, which introduces the threat.
Because with absolute mastery comes a new, pretty haunting boundary. You find yourself in the quiet midnight hours, staring up into the digital void, gripped by one massive question. Who exactly is watching the display screen? Is your universe a high-fidelity historical reconstruction running in the basement of some future human civilization? Is it an advanced alien intelligence engineering a complex psychological stress test? Or, and this might be the most terrifying, is it just a forgotten consumer simulation operating on a localized server that could literally be unplugged at any moment?
This constant, looming threat of a systemic reset forces you into what we'll call a data preservation mission. You start treating every single day as a critical effort to push boundaries, but you have to operate really carefully. Why? Because you absolutely must avoid activating any automated anomaly detection protocols that might flag your consciousness for routine deletion. It's a massive high-stakes balancing act. You have to be extraordinary, for sure, but not so glitchy that the cosmic IT guy decides to just wipe your server.
Finally, this brings us to the grandest evolution of your consciousness, Stage 5, the ultimate sandbox and absolute freedom.
When you finally accept that this world is a grand stage crafted entirely from light and math, a massive burden simply evaporates into the digital ether. The illusion of objective reality, those heavy societal expectations, systemic pressure, and even the paralyzing fear of cosmic insignificance and death, they all just vanish. Because your world isn't anchored in eternal atomic gravity, your choices and your actions are elevated to the status of pure, unrestricted creation.
And really, it all boils down to this. The experience of consciousness itself is intensely, undeniably real to the mind perceiving it. It really doesn't matter if the textures of life are simulated. You can forge deep, resonant connections and build magnificent empires precisely because your subjective experience is profoundly real to you. The simulation doesn't negate your existence at all. It simply changes the canvas that you're painting on.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative thought. If the world is just a game, how will you choose to play? Through this entire thought experiment, you get to step back into the crowd not as a captive actor following a script, but as a waking dreamer who has finally learned how to play on their own terms. It's an absolutely fascinating perspective on reality, isn't it? Take that with you today and keep questioning the nature of your own reality.